Hey everybody, hope you can hear us all right. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much for registering. We're really excited to be back, I suppose, with the third and final installment of our webinar series, which has been really focused on startups and accounting tech startups specifically. So the first one was really around what do accountants love and hate about vendors and working with vendors. So there's some great communication and collaboration there from the accounting industry back to you guys as vendors. The second one was on building for big firms and the unique challenges that come with that, because obviously big and small practices are very different in the way that they work. And today we're joined by three awesome people to talk about the importance of the right integrations. And so we're really keen to get stuck into this at quite a deep level, but I suppose just as a bit of a starting point, and a brief introduction. My name is obviously Jack Teal. I'm the co-founder of the Early Adopters Hub. I am a chartered accountant by trade. I spent the early years of my career in a variety of different firms, tried out audit. That wasn't for me. Tried working in a small local practice, which I really enjoyed. But my passion for tech led me into software. And then eventually that's where I met my co-founder Johan. And that's why we're here today running the Early Adopters Hub. If you don't know who we are, we basically sit between the accounting industry and the vendors. And I suppose that gives us a little bit of a unique perspective on topics like this, because not only are we working with vendors on how to build integrations and which integrations they should prioritize, but we're hearing from accountants as to what they need, which apps they need talking to each other, and the extent to which they need those apps to integrate. Of course, there's a few other lessons in between around making the most of those integrations. So that's why I've brought Melissa from FuseSign and FuseWorks, Amy from Clarity Street, and Josie from Xero, all of them bringing a different perspective on this topic. And so I'm really keen to hear their thoughts. Before I hand it over to them to give a quick introduction, I kind of want to just call out that we're here to really get into the thick of it. We do, it's a no holds barred kind of conversation. We like to bring the honest insight that you might not be able to get anywhere else. We're not sponsored by a vendor. We're not backed by anyone. So it's really up to us to kind of let you guys as vendors know what accountants really need, and bring that, honest approach. Unfortunately, there are a lot of apps out there that integrate, or quote unquote integrate. They do the bare minimum. They chuck the logo up on the website. They put a lot of flashy marketing out there, but there's not a lot to what they've built. So, we hope to kind of get into that a little bit today as well. I'm keen to hear what Melissa, Amy, and Josie think of that topic. But yeah, I suppose, hopefully it's interesting. If you do have any questions along the way, chuck them in the chat. I have questions myself, but I might hand it over now. Melissa, Amy, Josie, to introduce yourself. Amy, if you can go first, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you, Jack. Thank you for having me today on the call. I've just worked out amongst the four of us on this that are presenting today, I'm the odd one out. I'm the only one that's not technically an accountant, which is, I was just thinking about that. It's like, ooh, but don't let that, change things. So I've come from practice myself, but just not as an accountant. I've seen it from a practice management perspective. Clarity Street was actually born out of an idea, having worked in practice at a number of firms, having worked at one of the apps myself. I worked at Ignition, and then obviously implementing. I worked for a company that obviously implemented Xero Practice Manager way back when it was even before Xero purchased it. It was Workflow Max. So I've been around the accounting app integration space for quite some time, and Clarity Street was born out of the idea that there weren't a lot of people that understood how apps actually integrated. There weren't a lot of vendors out there who wanted to take responsibility for for where the integration sat. So, if Ignition connected to Xero Practice Manager from a job workflow perspective, well, then whose responsibility was it to actually make sure that flowed through? And I had this weird niche set of knowledge and skills around all the apps and how they integrated. So that's how Clarity Street was actually born, because there was a real need in the industry to help accountants navigate their way through all the apps and how they actually integrated. So what information fed from one piece of software to another, how they talked. If you did this and set it up this way, what was the impact to the next piece of software and the knock-on effect of everything? So Clarity Street created what we now know as our app stack image. That was probably about 4 years ago now. And that really set us apart, I think, in terms of helping to visualize all of the apps in the market space for the accounting industry, and just helping them understand, this is the function of your business. This is the app that relates to that. How people get on our app stack, and I can talk a bit more about this later, is, the apps need to integrate with each other. There needs to be, it needs to be cloud-based. They need to talk. They need to obviously have information flowing from one piece of software to another. And the whole benefit of that is efficiency. Everything comes back down to how efficient can you be? How efficient can your team be, so that, they can do their job better? Because no accountant got into being an accountant so they could sit there and do administration work and, try and do things manually. The whole point of it is you got into business so that you could, accountants got into business so that they could provide advice and good financial advice to their clients. If they're spending all their time trying to work out how to use the damn software, it's not the best use of their time. It's not why they went to university, basically. So yeah, that's a little bit about Clarity Street. That's why we're here. And that's, I guess, why I'm here talking on this topic as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. Josie, if we stick with alphabetical order.
So I am an accountant. I was in practice in a reasonable sized firm in Melbourne for a few years, and actually had the job of rolling out Xero for that practice after having been on MYOB. So the concept of integrations and having the choice, so best of breed of producing a particular app stack, became very relevant for me and interesting. I've also had the opportunity to work for an app. So I've seen the pain of having an app and these integrations and what it means to make sure that it's a great experience. Xero is a platform, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But just the importance of having these integrations in our industry, in the accounting and bookkeeping industry, is just really important in allowing them to produce the workflows and best of breed the solution that's actually going to help them solve their pain points, rather than stuck with something that is just what they have to use. But I think that's it for me.
Yeah, great.
Great. Melissa?
Yeah, on to me. Very similar. Amy sort of alluded to it earlier. I am a chartered accountant, have been in practice for too many years to comment on. And it was from some of the frustrations in our practice as well, similar to Amy, that led us to create our own software business and build some software specifically for our industry. So there were some frustrations we had internally using some legacy systems that there didn't seem to be any software to fill those gaps. So we went on the, bold journey of doing it ourselves and seeing if there was a need in the market. So sort of fast forward 10 years, we've got quite a few products in our stable now, and FuseSign being one of them, which is probably the most heavily integrated solution now across the ecosystem. So I'm coming with a very much an accounting hat, but on the other side now, rolling out software in accounting firms and heading up the clients and partners for the FuseWorks business. So that sees, I guess, different conversations on a daily basis with clients, so accountants, with integrations, so other platforms and how we can work with them, and all of the bits and pieces that go in between that. And it's been quite a steep learning curve for me as an accountant, putting on a tech hat without having a tech hat to start with. So very much coming from the client experience, people side of the business. So yeah, hopefully I can share some insight into that part of the equation, which I think is a really important part of the integrations, and some of the successes have been because of that human element of the technology. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to today.
Cool. Thanks, guys. And on that last point, Melissa, I think there's a lot of founders out there, at least a lot that we deal with, who do come from an accounting background, because why else, who else is building software for accountants other than ex-accountants? It's not necessarily the first go-to place for other people to build software. So, coming from having had that experience, as I suppose a first question, and then we can kind of just let the conversation go from there, is, why are integrations so important? Why should those founders, those new founders out there building new tech for this industry, really care about building integrations?
Yeah, well, I can answer that. Things have changed a lot in the last 10, 20 years. Back in the day when we first started in accounting, there wasn't a need for integrations. There was a platform that pretty much did it all. didn't do it all well by any means, but they had a software suite, and we all chose one solution, and it tried to tick the boxes when it comes to all of the moving parts, compliance, CRM, all of the parts of our business. So that has changed a lot, and it's given, and we talk about, best of breed, it's given firms now the choice to go, well, no, I want that bit, that bit, that bit, that bit. So now it's our job to connect the dots with all of these bits so that they talk together. And so it's a good, I guess, result that we can choose what is going to work in our practice for the types of clients that we have with the size of our business. But it's of, I guess, utmost importance to make sure that we're leveraging the systems across that stack in the most, the simplest way. So, consistency in database, not having to duplicate data. There's some of the, I guess, the simple elements. One database, one sort of source of truth, as we call it, and have different systems interact with it. So yeah, it never used to be a problem. It really is now, and it's on all of the integrations out there to work together better than we've ever had, because of necessity, and it's expectation now, and the expectation of accountants is sort of pushing us down that path at a really rapid rate.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if people like Amy have helped to increase the awareness of, the importance of integrations. Like Amy, what's your perspective on how important this is from the accounting side, maybe?
I probably think that I'm far too passionate for my own good at times in relation to this topic about integrations. Like, I am very vocal with quite a few people actually on this call, I've noticed today, just in relation to, I'm like, why doesn't it do this? Come on, guys, logically it should do this. Just because it's like, I guess the benefit from my perspective is what I highlight, that I'm not an accountant, is because I do feel like I bring an advantage in some shape, that I can see things differently from being that conditioned mindset of this is the way. So, and I'm generalizing here, so forgive me, but a lot of accountants are conditioned to focus on the anomaly. You're conditioned to focus on that 1% that doesn't quite fit. Whereas I can look at the bigger picture, because I'm not conditioned in that way, because that's just not the way that I was trained, that I can look at things in a more holistic way and go, well, if it does that, then that's the next step, and that does that, and that connects basically. So, the advantages for me, like, as I say, like I've been very vocal about these, is because all I look at is, just because it is doesn't mean it should be. That's the first thing when it comes to the way that we've done things in the past, especially when it comes to software and applications. But equally, if it did X, Y, Z, whatever we're trying to achieve here, then think of what that could then achieve for the firm. So it all comes down to, as Melissa said, it all comes down to an efficiency perspective. I'm a problem solver at heart. So I want to be able to find the quickest way to complete a task. Also, I'm from an administration background as well. So I hate doing admin, realistically, like in the most cumbersome way. So if there are things that can improve not my life, but the lives of the industry, the people who are working in this industry, as I said at the beginning, so that they can get back to doing what they're there to do, which is service the client base. No one got into business to do administration. You all got into business so that you could actually provide good advice and provide a good service to the end user. And that's what it comes to from integrations is, if it can be done quicker, in a quicker way, because this will talk to this. And I know it's not that easy. I appreciate that it's not that easy sometimes, just about, the way APIs are built and the way that you want software to connect to other pieces of software. I've been living in the world of Workflow Max and then Xero Practice Manager for long enough to know the challenges that come with, APIs and, being in that space. But where you can actually provide those integrations, that means 10 less clicks for somebody as an end user. That means more time that they can spend servicing the clients that they're actually meant to be servicing, essentially. So that's why I'm quite passionate and vocal about it.
I'm guessing you're not on the other hand wishing that we went back to an all-in-one scenario, though.
No.
So
despite
the difficulties.
Yeah, despite the difficulties, the thing that I love about it the most is the choice. Mm-hmm. It's just, there's so much more choice out there that you can pick and choose the things that you want. I mean, there are downfalls in integrations, which I'm sure that we're going to get into. Definitely there are. But, having been in a practice where you are hamstrung and connected to one piece of software, like if that went down, the server went down, that's a couple of days of lost business. Like, that's not, that's literally what used to happen. not just, you know, we think that it might have happened. That literally used to happen. I mean, Josie and Melissa can probably speak to that way better than what I can, just in terms of the impact to a business when, you know, one of the other applications that are out there, if your server went down or the application went down, you need to stop. Whereas now, there are so many different ways of doing business, and that's the benefit of it, it's choice.
Yeah, yeah. And Josie, I suppose on your end, you know, there's hundreds of apps, new and old, that integrate with Xero, both on the I suppose the accounting side, from you know, whether it's just a client facing tool or if it's an accounting practice product. You know, why is it important from Xero's perspective to enable that ecosystem, and why is it worthwhile an early stage product to worry about building that integration?
Well, obviously with Xero, you know, I think maybe Xero was the initiator of changing this whole concept of a single vendor, you know, to produce everything and allowing for that freedom of choice. And you know, Amy sort of touched on it. There are still some of the legacy providers moving to the cloud who are still very closed off from an API perspective, and not really wanting to allow the customer to have that choice. But when it comes to the integrations, it's like whether you're Xero, who is a platform, right, or whether you are an app like in Melissa's case with Fuse Docs and things like that. If you're building something and if you don't have,
we may have lost you for a second there, Josie. I mean, whilst Josie reconnects, I did just have another question there, and so Xero have obviously come a long way. Oh, sorry, Josie, we just lost you for a second there. I just heard something that you said, and I was just going to open that up to maybe both yourself and Melissa, which is you kind of said that Xero created that, or you know, played a big role in opening up the ecosystem. You know, is there something for startups who are listening in today to think about whether or not they might feel like they want to own those, you know, endpoints, rather than leaving them out there for anybody, potential competitors to you know, integrate with? And you know, how do you manage that control and keep benefiting from leaving it open?
I can probably jump in there. I guess there's a little bit of you want to have as much openness as possible without it being a detriment. So you could have, say, FuseSign is a great example. We could have any integration partner integrate with FuseSign as a signing choice. So they don't want to go and build it themselves. They just integrate with us and have us do the heavy lifting when it comes to digital signing. If we let anybody through the gates in terms of tapping into that and had a really bad experience from that app perspective, it's a bad reflection on us. So I guess there needs to be a level of it's open and available, but with some constraints and some common goals, and some, you know, we'll probably touch on this towards the end in terms of what makes a good and what makes a bad integration. But there needs to be a little bit of control around that for the client experience and the expectation that we want out of our product going out into the wild. So that's from my perspective. I'd be interested to hear what Josie says about Xero, because obviously you've got a lot more moving parts.
Yeah, I think Josie might just be reconnecting or something like that. But
or she didn't want to answer. No,
no, that's right. So I mean, what makes a successful integration then?
Collaboration. So we obviously, as one piece of the puzzle, want platforms to integrate with us for the signing element. So great. Again, don't do it all yourself. Sort of stick to your knitting, you know, stick to the things that you're good at, and don't try to do it all, which is sort of the old legacy systems. They're trying to do it all and you just can't do it all. So we want a client to interact with us. There needs to be, I guess, an understanding of what the platform can do. So what are both doing? Is there a fit? And is there the right connections available between both platforms to achieve that end-to-end experience? So, you know, there is all sorts of levels of integrations, from really, really deep ones to, you know, to quite light integrations. So I guess the conversation with that's different, but open communication and understanding, and, you know, trying to be pushing in the same direction is really important, because different apps can have different priorities. So in terms of just that, if you're going to build an integration, you've got to put the time, the effort, and have a really good understanding of what you're trying to achieve and where different parts stop and start.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, Amy, I didn't know if you had any other thoughts on that, but there's a couple of bits in there around, there's very deep integrations and there's very light integrations. Sometimes that's just because that's all that needs to be done. What data is okay? What data needs to be integrated? What data is okay to be managed manually, if there is any? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think, just to answer the previous one, which was what makes a good one, I think that it solves a problem. That's my main thing. I think some of from an integration perspective, generally, like looking at all of the integrations that are out there, they need to solve a problem essentially. Like there are deep ones, there are light ones. Yes, I agree with that. But some of the lighter ones actually create more hassles than they're worth. So it's like, well, why did you build it in the first place? Pointing case, can I use the Xero example? Is that okay? So for example, Xero Practice Manager versus Xero from an invoicing perspective, you can only have one primary contact in Xero Blue at the moment, so it won't push all the contacts across. So from an invoicing, like whilst it's a nice integration to obviously be able to push a contact across and push and pull, there's limitations on what that integration will do, and actually can create more issues than it's worth sometimes, depending on where you want to send your invoice out of. That's one tiny, teeny little integration issue. For the most part, I would say that the majority of all integrations are phenomenally good. But, I think it does depend on what you're trying to achieve. Like, just because you can connect, you're right to what you said earlier, Jack, just because you can connect, great. But what are you trying to achieve with that connection? Like, what's the end goal with what the connection and the integration is actually going to achieve for the end user's capability? But also not just thinking about it from I think sometimes there are app providers that can think of it from a blind spot perspective and can think of it from more of a, well, this is commercially viable versus this is actually going to solve a real need and a pain point in a firm's position. And I'm talking from obviously an accounting firm's perspective, but there is sometimes the thought around, well, this is more commercially viable, so we'll just do this integration because that's just going to work, rather than this actually solves a problem for this industry. So yeah, that's some thoughts on that one.
Yeah, and Josie, did you have any thoughts on what makes a successful integration?
Yeah, because it really doesn't come down to how deep of an integration it is. I mean, everybody sort of touched on it. It really comes down to, well, what is it that you're trying to solve? And is it this one tiny piece, but then it could be one tiny piece of the puzzle that you are trying to solve, but it's part of a bigger picture as well. So if they're going to use your app and they're going to use, say, the Xero platform, and they've got that, well, how does that whole solution then impact them? Like, are you actually making their experience in general of using the core app, being maybe Xero, but then like FuseStone, like what's the experience there? Is that still a great experience rather than just the problem in its isolation? So how can you actually build a great integration? You've got to think about their experience, I strongly believe, also outside of your particular little bit that you're trying to solve. It's how else, because got to remember, now that we're giving people choice and an app stack, it's, you do need to think a bit beyond you and your app. Well, how does my app plug into their overall pain? Am I, yes, solving it in isolation, but am I adding extra hassle for them over here? So it really is that whole bit. And I think that there is still, in a lot of instances, a lot of work needs to be done and thinking beyond my initial pain that I'm solving for somebody and the whole picture. I think there's still quite a bit to be had in that sort of space.
That's very interesting, that concept as a vendor, to look beyond what you're offering and say, well, how do I actually solve a bigger problem within or where do I sit within that broader app stack, not where do I stand alone?
Yeah, it's like the workflow. It's like all of these things fit into some sort of workflow, especially in an accounting practice. Yeah. If it's invoicing, just in Xero Blue in general, I'm doing data management or I'm doing payment service. Like, it's really part of a whole workflow. And does your addition help that workflow in its complete, the complete situation, in the complete workflow, not just that little tiny.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so obviously the opposite.
I was just
Sorry,
going to say,
Amy,
Jack,
you're right.
sorry. Apologies. I was going to say, I guess that's why we did, we've done our day in the life of a cloud accountant, which shows all the apps actually working in uniform from a workflow perspective deliberately, because there's so much, there's a lack of knowledge, I think, in the industry of what that workflow should be and how they actually talk. But it's deliberate to that point of what you're talking about, Josie, around, you know, this is how all the apps fit into the bigger picture of the holistic. This is how, you know, an accounting practice is running their firm. This is the client life cycle. And that's that whole point of, you know, showing them basically, but understanding, well, the impact, if one does this, then what is the overall impact to the rest of them essentially? Sorry, Jack, go for it.
No. I was just going to say, I mean, we've obviously spoken now about what makes a successful integration, and what vendors should be thinking about. And inevitably, the opposite of doing those things is what a bad integration would look like, potentially. But there may also be some other things. I guess I just wanted to ask the question, are there any common mistakes you see out there? Are there any apps you're seeing doing it the wrong way or taking the wrong approach? And what are the lessons? Feel free to jump in, anyone, if you got any thoughts on that.
I don't think that there's bad.
Yeah.
I'll go now.
No, you're right.
You go.
I was just thinking, like, you lose a bit of control. So I know for our business, we know where we fit, and you know, we're looking at it from the ultimate end client. So not the accounting firm, the actual client user. How do we give a client of an accounting firm a consistent approach to digital signing? So to do that, we need to make sure we, as ViewSign, integrate with all of these other platforms that accountants are using, so that they can in turn give their client the same experience regardless of their technology. So that's a big focus for us. I guess the lack of control can make a bad integration, or not even an integration opportunity, because if we want features in our platform, or if we have some client feedback, we just go in and do it. You know, we're agile and we get things done. Our priorities are different to, say, an app we want to integrate with priorities. They might not be ready to integrate with us, so there's nothing we can do about that. So I guess what makes it bad is potentially the difference in priorities. It's no one's fault. It's just there's different priorities out there. But again, our clients are saying, well, why can't you integrate with this? And we're like, yeah, we want to. It's not as simple as that sometimes. You know, there's time. So it kind of gives that feeling of, well, it should be easy. Well, I know from an accountant perspective, I just wanted stuff, yeah.
On that, Melissa, so, I mean, you've obviously built a business, ViewSign, that does rely on a lot of other pieces of tech as well, because if you couldn't get those integrations across the line, then you couldn't execute on that ultimate goal that you've got.
Yeah.
So how do you go about convincing, or almost having that conversation with those other providers and saying, hey, this is something you should be prioritizing as well?
Yeah, look, I think time has helped. So we're 2 years in maturity of ViewSign, reputation, focus on our industry, and everyone knowing that we deliver on what we're promising. And I think the reputation is there in terms of if we're knocking on doors now for integrations, that people are listening to that because their clients are demanding that. And there's just a nice cohesion when it comes to our industry and what we're doing, and people are listening to that. So that's really good. But initially it was sort of, well, who are you? You know, we've never heard of, you know, ViewSign before. What are you even doing here? So yeah, that's taken time, but it's also taken hard work and clear focus on the accounting industry and integrating with the things that accountants are using. So of course you're going to get known pretty quickly.
Yep. No, absolutely. So I mean, back to the last question, Amy and Josie, were there any lessons out there that you can kind of share? Any bad integration experiences you've had?
Amy,
I don't think there's bad Yeah, I was just like, I don't think that there are bad integrations. I think that there are integrations that, like in anything that happens in business, there are opportunities for improvement is where I would go with that. I would say that there have been poorly managed integrations and rollouts of integrations, and that's where it's probably more of a downfall, is the lack of communication around a rollout will be to the detriment of an integration, in my opinion. I will use another Xero example. Sorry, Josie, but Xero HQ. The actual integration is fine, but the rollout of the two-way sync between the integration between XPM and Xero HQ and therefore Xero, the way that was managed, unfortunately, probably wasn't executed as well as it could have. But equally saying that, your lesson learned, I guarantee you it'll never happen again, sort of thing. So it's just about having there are also to that point though, there are also times where you can do as much testing as you damn well like or try to, but sometimes you just don't know how the cookie's going to crumble. So, I also appreciate that, that sometimes you just don't know what the outcome is going to be when you do turn on an integration or upgrade an integration, for example. So as much testing and trialing as you can do, but equally the communication component around it, that's when there'll be, if you don't communicate it clearly and set expectations, I think with anything in business, that's where, I think that there's going to be a downfall and make it probably a not so great integration, basically. So yeah, Josie, over to you.
So I'm gonna talk to it in the much bigger sense of like the initial integration as opposed to any new features and things being released, because I think integration is only one part of it, right? It then comes down to, well, what's the support behind it? What's the onboarding for a partner like? What's the customer success? What's that journey all look like? Because I've seen examples, I've been in examples of where that experience is not great for a partner. Like the product has what it needs, but the understanding and the messaging and the communication and the onboarding and everything is just not up to scratch, which therefore creates frustration with the end user. So you could have all of your APIs right, what you're intending for the product to do, but if you don't also have the customer support to go with it, you're also going to be missing the mark, and you're not going to get the support from the community, from the accountants and bookkeepers and even small business owners to use the product, because I don't have what I need to understand what you're doing, because one, it might not be intuitive, and sometimes it can't be helped, right, because of the type of solution that you may have built, and it does need a fair bit of hand-holding. But if you can make it intuitive so that somebody can get in there and self-serve, then that's great. But yeah, if you don't have the other parts, like you've got the product, if you don't have the customer support, the education and all of that behind it, you're also going to not have a great integration, because you don't have the support for the customer to understand what it is you want, or the sales team or whatever it might be in that area. That's just as important as the actual product.
And I'm wondering if that's why, a lot of early stage startups will have a Zapier integration right off the bat, something like a Zapier integration at least, because it's almost like outsourcing the work, because you're just handing it over to them and saying, hey, now you can integrate with millions of apps. And I guess kind of saying also, oh, look, you don't have to be familiar with my product, you're going to be familiar with Zapier. But I don't know if you guys can speak on behalf of the accounting industry as to whether or not that is a relevant and really valuable integration, or if that's actually something that doesn't need to be prioritized as the first one off the bat. From
my perspective, like, well, firstly, Zapier isn't as in an approved app in the Xero ecosystem in our world. Like, I think that to rely on that to create your integration, you don't have control of the data. You don't know what may or may not be coming across. So I wouldn't be recommending that you start off an app using something like a Zapier. You're much better off to have control of the data, like know exactly the data that you're pulling. I don't know the ins and outs of Zapier, but that would be where we sit. Like, it's not in. If you were to use that with a Xero like integration, it's not an integration that would be in the Xero ecosystem. It wouldn't be like a certified app, and you wouldn't get the traction that you would get from being an approved app and using the resources that we have on developer.xero.com to help you build a solution and the particular API points.
Yeah.
I'm a bit torn with Zapier, I'll be honest with you, because on one hand, I can see the commercial viability from a new app that comes out from building a Zapier integration, because then it therefore allows you to integrate with multiple apps. So I get that, like I get it from the commercial component. The flip side to that is if you build a native integration between an app, like what FuseSign has done with all of the apps in the ecosystem, then I guess, Melissa, you can talk to this point more, is what's the upkeep? You have to basically upkeep an integration with multiple different apps rather than keeping it centralized under Zapier. Then the other side of the coin from a Zapier component is Zapier is also very limited in terms of what it will allow you to integrate with. So, and it's also another piece of software that you need to learn how to use. And truthfully, Zapier's not that easy. It's not overly intuitive to actually use. And I'm not an idiot when it comes to how apps integrate. And I still struggle with Zapier sometimes. It's like doing a bloody VLOOKUP in Excel. But anyway, that's another topic for another day. But, you know, like, it's just like, I'm torn with Zapier in terms of like, I can see where it fits, but I don't think it's the end solution is where I would sit with it. Like, I still truly believe that native integrations between the relevant apps to deploy what you need to deploy, connect, all the rest of that is going to be where you're really going to get an embedded client base and a really good end user client experience, customer experience, basically.
Yeah. Well, I'll jump in there. I 100% agree with Amy. It's it wouldn't be an or for us; it'd be an and. There's a lot of and Jack, you're on these conversations. We've done some research in the UK, and there seems to be a lot more appetite for things like Zapier there. Whether it's different skill sets are being recruited in accounting firms. There's, you know, a few more sort of tech savvy, different types of university degrees being recruited for that are like, you know, they're more interested in building their own integration. So yeah, we've had that come up a bit. But if I look at all of our integrations, the depth at which the integrations are truly part of these other platforms and they're building into us, that level of integration can't be achieved. And I think to the point before, you know, talking about some of those, you know, what makes it good and bad, that being really clear, and Josie was saying, you know, it's around the customer success, the onboarding, the ongoing stuff. You need to be with an integration, you need to have a united front. It's like a marriage. There's no blame game. It's like there's moving parts to an integration that you don't have control over. So you need to have this, I guess, way that you're going to be able to communicate with your mutual client base around the integration. So if there's something that, you know, comes to a support desk and you don't really know the answer to it, it's not just, or push it off, oh, it must be their problem. Like, we get this all the time. So for our integrations, it's very much having direct line of communication with the right people. So support to support, sales to sales, having Slack channels. So it's, if there's a problem, we're onto it. So that, because you can only, you know, I guess you only have a few chances when it comes to clients. If the integration's not working and consistently you're getting the, I'll go to them or go to them, they're not going to stay. They're not going to be part of it. So we've, I guess we've learned really quickly what it takes to have that, you know, united front when it comes to those integrations. And it's obviously, it's probably the biggest change in our business in the last 6 months.
I think I can see it from both the vendor side and the accountant side being better for a native integration, because if you build an integration with a product in the accounting industry as an early stage startup, you instantly gain a level of credibility that, you know, you were talking about earlier, that FuseSign, once over time you build that reputation, you know, having other brands attached to yours is going to be a good thing. You know, integrating with Xero, integrating with FuseSign, whatever it is, even if you're an early stage app, it's like, okay, cool. You've got to earn that. You got to go talk to those products and actually go through the process to prove to them it's worth their while. But if you can get that across the line, I think that's really good. But then also from an accountant perspective, I think it's one of those funny conversations we have a lot, which is, oh, cool, you integrate with Zapier, you integrate with everyone, move on. But then as they actually begin using the software and they only spend the first half an hour setting it up, because accountants are busy people, they don't have the time to get into the nitty gritty of setting up a million Zaps and then maintaining those Zaps as well. You know, there are firms hiring people who are going to be their like internal software management person who's going to deal with all of that stuff because they see a benefit in it. But yeah, it is a big challenge for firms. And I guess it's a temptation for an early stage startup to jump down the Zapier route and kind of say, cool, now I don't have to worry about it. But I do feel like there's a really big benefit to embedding yourself in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and like, you know, Xero does it well in terms of there's an ecosystem and they're vetting the apps. So an accountant coming and seeing if it's on the App Store, there's a level of comfort there. So as a new startup, and there might be some on the line, that's the sort of stuff you want to associate yourself with. How can you be part of an ecosystem? So even with Amy, with the stack, you know, the Clarity Street, the app stack, how can you have enough value and enough, I guess, integration and, you know, I guess, understanding of the industry to make it onto some of those things. So I would strongly suggest that they're the sorts of things that new startups need to be focusing on.
Absolutely. So I guess we've kind of started talking about it, but the battle between, you know, what is an integration and what is a partnership, I was curious to discuss as well. And I don't know, Amy, if you got any thoughts on it, but I know obviously from Melissa and Josie's perspective, it'd probably be a big talking point around what is the difference? Is there a difference between an integration and a partnership?
Look, in my opinion, and I'm the worst person to answer that one, but yeah, I reckon it's definitely more of a Josie and Melissa thing. My layperson's interpretation is a partnership is you're both mutually benefiting from the integration. And integration is the connection between the application to application talking. Partnership is we're not only got the integration, but also the partnership is we're mutually benefiting from it. But over to you guys for that one.
Yeah, look, I can jump in. An integration is only an integration, probably not even done very well if it doesn't come with a partnership. So when we look at, you know, integrations and other things we want to be working with, or clients have asked us to integrate with things, it is very much a technical integration conversation, and it's a value partnership. You know, what are we trying to achieve? And that you need both. So it's not just an integration or a partnership. It has to be an integration partnership, all in together to get the best outcome for that integration and the longevity of that. And, you know, all of the stuff Josie was talking about before, you know, what do you do? Why are you doing it? Communicate to your clients, update your knowledge bases, all of those things. You can't just have as just an integration that somebody's doing one side and the other side has no idea about it. It really needs to be a partnership.
Yeah, it's basically all apps in our app store. They're partnerships. Everybody who's come into our app store, you know, they've gone through the process, they've gotten the accreditation. They are partnerships. You know, they've signed on. They're helping to solve a pain point that our Xero partners, customers of all sorts are needing to help fill. Integration could be something like a Zapier. That's just a basic integration. They're not on our ecosystem. They're not in our app store. So for us, yeah, all of our app partners, if you sign up and you join the ecosystem, you're in partnership with Xero. And we're here to support you where we can and help solve for any pain points, like there might be APIs or tools in the developer end to help them keep on top of what's going on. And they also get things like with our new app store, there's a billing engine. So if apps can't afford to be investing in their own billing engine, you know, they can use our one. So that's where the ecosystem is for us, and that's all partnerships. As opposed to somebody who's, you know, gone and built an integration in some other way. That's just an integration. But we love our partnerships, and we're doing so much more with that I'm not going to say forever, but that's a bit of a big team. But there's lots of plans that we have in our team, in our partnerships team, head up by Pat Frigo actually soon. That's what's going on in that space there. But yeah, partnerships and working with and building to, I think are really important. And just to help give them, like small startups, give them some tools that they can't produce. And that's what you get from having a partnership with Xero.
And I think it's one of those things where if you've gone to the effort to build a really good connection with another product in the space, I don't think anyone has a problem with you going off and doing a webinar together and advertising it a little bit and saying, let's get it out there. Because at the end of the day, as we all said at the beginning, or as all of you said at the beginning, if you solve a problem, we kind of want to know about it as an industry. I think accountants are more than open to vendors talking about stuff if you're actually doing something, not just trying to market the same thing you've marketed for the last 3 years, but actually saying, hey, we've got something new here. We've solved a new problem. So we'll jump on this webinar and we'll show you how it works. That's
a really good point, because like they want to know what's your point of difference. Okay, there's so many apps out there that do similar things, but they want to know, well, what is your point of difference? So don't just come to me with something that another 3 of them do. If you're going to come in with an app, also have a difference, a point of difference, a key point of difference to help you stand out. Because you're likely going, if you're solving an existing pain point with an app, you want to have a point of difference so that you can win customers off other apps or those that haven't actually, come on this journey yet, and they've been making do with what they've had, and they're now ready to make the jump because you showed them your point of difference.
We often get apps that contact Clarity Street because they see our app stack and they go, hey, how do we get on that? And there are often times where, I'll be honest, I'm like, look, you don't kind of fit the mold because we are quite niche, quite specific in terms of if you solve a problem, but you also connect with the workflow, then that kind of makes sense. But that's not to say that I won't showcase, because like I've had a number of apps recently that I'm like, ooh, I like the look of you. You solve a problem. You're not quite fitting the mold yet, but I'm totally going to talk about you. So I will say to them, can you write me a blog? We'll promote it on the Clarity Street page, because that instantly gives, it's another voice, it's another avenue for the app. It allows us to provide some credibility to the industry that, hey, we're still looking for apps as well. And equally, it provides credibility to the app that's up and coming that wants to try and solve that problem, wants to get in that market space, which therefore means that more people will see it, more development will happen probably from the end user perspective, and they will eventually get there. There's a number of apps that are out there at the moment that, we have had conversations with that we've, that's how they started, and they're now skyrocketing in terms of further conversations and developments that they're having. Just picking on one, and I mean, they in a good way picking on one, Content Snare is a brand new app in the marketplace, not completely brand new, but, they've pivoted from the industry that they developed. It goes and collects data for people, but, we had a conversation with them. I was like, oh my God, you need to speak to Ignition, you need to speak to FYI, you need to speak to blah, blah, blah. And it's opened up these big conversation around, well, who can they speak to try and have further conversations development, which means that their own development is getting deeper with, and because partnerships are being formed. So it's a really good point around, don't just think that because your app doesn't necessarily integrate right now, whilst it may not solve the problem entirely, it will eventually, if you can see the vision and if you can actually spend the time to develop it and build those relationships with people like that are on this call right now. That's where you're obviously going to be able to, set the mark for your own development, basically, for the app, and people will love you eventually if they don't already.
And so I know you're stacked to some degree, and I know there's a big green icon in the middle of it, which is Xero Practice Manager.
Blue and green. Sorry.
They're both. and I think it's worth just talking about briefly, because we are talking about accounting tech, and I think especially for the Australian New Zealand market, it is a bit of a hub for a lot of data, and it's also a product that's been out there for a while. It's obviously offered for free to Xero partners, and so it kind of inevitably means it falls into a lot of practices around the country. So what's the importance of an early stage app building an integration with Xero Practice Manager? And maybe Josie, you can touch on what's that process look like? How do you actually get that? Because it's not as open, and maybe is it not as easy as the Xero Blue integration?
So we do have an open API, right? When it comes to XPM, it is an open API. There's just a couple of extra things in order to get certain data out of XPM because of the ATO regulations for DSP providers, right? So we do have an open API, and there's just a few extra hurdles to make sure that that you've got the right security clearances and things like that to get into it. And with the APIs, there's been some really great apps that come out of that space and have integrated really well with XPM. But if you're a new app and you're looking at, well, what can I do in this space? And I really want to help from the practice management side of things for an accounting practice. Find what is the gap, find a spot of what is the gap that you can help solve, because there's so many apps that solve different parts of the flow. And that's where, what Amy does and putting together the app stack, it's really important, helping them understand what their workflow is going to look like. But if you're a new app, if you're wanting to make an app and you want to be in that space, you really want to also make sure that you have conversations with the industry that you are trying to help solve. talk to them about what are the pain points that they are still feeling with XPM. You can also have a chat to us, and we can see how, of course, help you understand. And maybe there's room where we can say, look, we know we've got this gap. If you're willing to help solve it, then that's great. But we've got a dedicated team to help partners work out, to help apps and upcoming apps try to solve the right pain point. But because of the nature of the workflow with XPM and accounting practices, and XPM tends to underpin a lot of things, it's really making sure that you understand how XPM works and what the workflow is, and then what it is that you were going to solve. Like I could reel off things that you could solve, but I'm not going to do that. Because but from our perspective, so from a Xero platform perspective, we want people to come along and bounce out ideas off us and say, look, we're interested in maybe solving this pain point. So if there are apps out there that are wanting to discuss, just go to the developer.xero.com website, and you can chat to the right people and try to understand the pain point and what you're able to do. Because yes, it's not as open an API as a Xero Blue is, but it's for very good reasons that it's not. We have to protect data. It's very sensitive data in that space. But yeah, if you are interested in it, definitely go to the developer website, chat to our guys, and then understand the customers, like chat to customers. I think, Jack, that's what you guys do a lot of, is help up and coming apps actually understand or talk to that particular.
Yeah, correct. So I mean, we have a lot of conversations around XPM with accountants because it's often on their must-have list. When you talk to an accounting firm, they'll say it's kind of a deal breaker. If you want me to reproduce my client list, that's going to be a time-consuming process for me, and it means it's something I'm not going to do. And so inevitably, very quickly, I'm going to have two client lists that are out of sync. It does happen. There are firms that run two client lists because systems don't talk to each other. They kind of make it work, but it's not ideal, and they'd prefer it not to be. And that only happens where they're two very substantial and very important systems, and they're kind of willing to deal with that pain because there's a major benefit at the other end. But if you're just offering a niche kind of product in a very specific vertical, I think it is a really critical integration to have. And the conversations we have with vendors and accountants goes to show just how detailed you need to be when it comes to where do I fit within the workflow? How deep does this integration go? Are we just integrating clients? Are we integrating family groups? Are we integrating contacts? What client data are we pulling? Are we pushing workflow items in, or are we leaving workflow alone? It's a very nuanced, detailed problem to deal with. And obviously, I think you just start somewhere, and then you can grow and extend the functionality. And Amy, I'm sure you've seen from your experience apps that do it well and integrate the right way, and apps that maybe leave a lot of value on the table by not doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the benefit, though, is equally the more noise that has been pushed around this, single source of truth type scenario. And the reason why Xero Practice Manager is the central point of our database or our app stack is because originally it was actually called the Xero Firm App Stack, which kind of makes sense. And it's just kind of stayed and it's grown that way. But because equally, Xero is still to this day the only, correct me, anybody on this call, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but the only true cloud practice management application that has an open API to integrate with additional apps outside of their ecosystem. Whilst the other main front runners, APS, MyOb, Handy, are trying to do their best to come to that point. Even Carbon in some way, shape or form, but not quite. They're doing it from a different way, looking at, integrating a tax platform. No one's actually done what Xero has done, which is why they are still the front runner. Greatsoft would still be the only one that would be a close contender for that, which is why that's also on there, because they connect through to Xero and Xero Ledgers, which is the other reason why they're still there. But in terms of, I think the more noise around the desire for having this single source of data truth, I think the progression for the industry is going from having one platform where all of your data was housed to having multiple platforms where there were multiple client lists. And now, rather than going back to I want one application that does it all, we now want a single data point, which is a single source of truth for the client and contact information. We still see it as Xero Practice Manager at the moment, deliberately. And there are other apps that haven't necessarily followed suit with that, but equally, the more noise that's happening, the more that they're actually developing and redeveloping that. One that I would say that is pretty close to being released, I'm fairly certain, is the redevelopment of the CAS 360 integration through BGL. That integration, when it was originally built, it wasn't as strong as what it could have been. At the time when it was built, though, it didn't necessarily need to be that strong because the industry wasn't like, desperately wanting that one database. Now, though, they're rebuilding it and they're about to relaunch it, and it's pretty much going to be clean as a whistle, which is going to be amazing. So you can go back to having that single source of truth, which is your XPM data, basically.
And Melissa, how was your experience building that for Fuse?
For us with XPM, is that what you mean? Yeah. Quite simple, easy. For FuseSign, all we really care about is contact data, so name, email, mobile. But I was sort of having a little chuckle to myself when people want integrations, but it's only as good as the data. So we get funny things all the time. So for us, I guess the ultimate thing is if they've got Xero Practice Manager, that works with CAS 360, that pushes to FuseSign, it pushes back, it might file back into FYI. Like, this is what we're talking about. Like, a client can choose all of those different parts, but those in that ecosystem work really well together. So yeah, it doesn't always work that seamlessly. But the other point probably on that is you've got to start somewhere. You start small with an integration. You'll learn pretty quickly through client collaboration and feedback on what else they want. So you don't have to try to build the big ship. You can start with the little boat. Just start somewhere, but do that somewhere really, really well.
FuseSign is actually a really great example of, and don't take this the wrong way, of like a basic integration with XPM, because that's all it needed.
That's right.
It's the client list. It doesn't need to be some massive integration with Xero.
And
it still connects the dots. It still connects the dots.
And we purposely went with a read-only connection. So we want Xero to be the source of truth. The practice management system, regardless of what it is, should be that source of truth. We want to just consume that data and not have the friction where people can be updating it here. We just want it simple. Update it in your source of truth and we'll just use it. So yeah, that is. But it's simple, yet it is providing so much power.
Yeah, agreed. And what's interesting from a deep integration perspective, on the flip side to that is, Jackie, you can probably talk to this a little bit, one of your old haunts, FYI integration with Xero Practice Manager. That is such a deep integration that the industry is now confused as to where they should be sitting. Am I in Xero Practice Manager or am I in my FYI? What's best practice? I don't know how to do things, which, I guess I'm grateful I'm incredibly grateful for this conversation right now in the industry, and that's what it's provided, because to be honest with you, because of the industry and all the different integrations, that's why Clarity Street exists. So we can talk to that point, but I am genuinely grateful for that. But it is an interesting one between a basic integration, which works really clean and well, versus a really deep integration. And the industry is going, well, I don't know what I'm meant to be doing. What's best practice? It's just an interesting situation.
And that's why we need you. Thanks.
That was also what I was saying before, is you don't want to be building everything for the sake of having everything. It's stick to what you can solve the best.
Just because you can.
Rather than
just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, maybe that's a good note to wrap up on. I know we've got a couple of minutes left, but thank you, Melissa, Amy, Josie, for coming. Really appreciate your honesty. Awesome insight. Really good to hear, all the lessons from each of your unique perspectives. Obviously, Melissa from the product side, Josie from the platform, the ecosystem side, and Amy from the implementation and the accounting side. So it's been great to have you guys. It's been awesome to have so many of you rock up. We obviously recorded the session, so if you jumped in late or you had to leave early or whatever it is, I'll throw the recording up over the next few days on LinkedIn. And thank you very much. This is the end of the 3-part series, but I'm sure we'll be back with some more stuff in the future. So I look forward to seeing you then. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you guys.
Everyone. Bye.
Bye.